What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with a little DFS and betting live stream for this week's American Express. Going to break down what you need to know heading into lock to make sure you have all your questions answered, all the information that you're going to need to go out there and hopefully find yourselves into the green. We've got David down there. What's going on? We'll get to your question here in a few. What's going on, Nick? What's going on, Go Birds? Hopefully you're having a solid Wednesday evening, our Christmas Eve right before the tournament starts. And kind of like Nick said, should be an interesting week. It's a little wonky with the 3 different golf courses, but kind of like Go Birds started talking about there. Good little segue. Pretty good for the showdown side. And honestly, for props, anything where you can really dig in on this kind of setup, you're going to find some value. So we'll talk about the DFS angle, right? How you want to attack this 3-course setup, maybe some showdown stuff, but then more importantly, the types of players that succeed at this kind of event. I think there's quite an edge this week to go out there and target some of your higher birdie percentage players. And ownership reflects that in a few cases, but not throughout the entire player pool. So particularly like when we're talking sleeper plays, values, that kind of thing, I think it's a really good week for it. And I think you're going to find a lot of low-owned guys down there in the 7K range that can win this golf tournament, right? Let alone get into contention. But the first place we'll start is with this 3-course setup. And right, normally we go through the different scoring averages throughout the years. And this week, especially when we're playing showdown for rounds 1 through 3, going to be important to take a look at the course by course stats. So for round 1 showdown, if I was going to play round 1 showdown, I'm not going to sit out for round 1. I'd be playing guys at La Quinta Country Club. Now, you might look at last year's averages and say that La Quinta was the hardest of the bunch. I would totally agree with you, but if we look back, a few years ago, you see La Quinta, right, was the easiest course in 2022. They didn't play La Quinta in 2021, so we'll skip that year. 2020 it also played as the easiest golf course. 2019 was also the easiest, right? We go back to 2018, was once again the easiest golf course. So if I'm leaning anything for round 1, it's going to be the guys on La Quinta. But last year, right, we saw that trend get bucked. So I'm hesitant to go all in, right, on round 1 showdown without having some of those scoring averages. But by the time we relay for our round 2 stream, which of course, guys, it'll be at the mornings this week. So we'll be getting up at like 9 a.m., maybe even like 8 a.m. going live. We'll be able to give you all the information for round 2. So my approach is going to be to sit back, right, try and take in some of that data from Thursday. And it's worth noting that almost all the good players are playing on La Quinta. So I'm expecting it to play much easier than the other 2 golf courses. Not only is it long-term the easiest of the bunch, but you also have the best talent level out there on La Quinta. Just to give you an idea, we take a look at some of the players up here, right? Xander, you have Scotty playing on La Quinta, Patrick Cantlay, JT, I believe Jason Day, Sam Burns, Finau. Almost all these guys are playing on La Quinta. Then you have guys like Sunjay M, also Tom Kim that are playing on the Nicklaus tournament course. So there are a few guys that are playing the other track, but a vast majority of especially like Scotty, Xander, and Cantlay are all going to be playing on La Quinta Country Club. So round 1, I guess if you're going to target one course, right, you're going to be playing a lot of La Quinta anyways. But in terms of scoring conditions, I also think it'll be the easiest out of the bunch. In terms of the weather, we're going to have 3 days of weather to look at, and it looks almost identical from day to day. So this is the HRRR for Thursday. You'll see that it looks calm pretty much the entire time. We go over for the GFS. Actually, we'll do the NAM model out there for 2 days out. The NAM model, most accurate, right, about a day and a half out. Looks like it's going to be sub 5-mile-an-hour winds. And then no matter which model we're looking at, right, the weekend looks the same, right? Pretty much no wind out there. I don't think there's going to be a huge edge to taking guys on certain golf courses. In years past, there have been a few splits between the different venues, but it's varied year to year. There's been years where it's been best to start on Stadium, right? Get the hard course out of the way. There have been years where it's been best to start on the La Quinta, Nicklaus tournament course. It's just, in my opinion, it's hard to even get that course right if you went that angle. And second off, the edges were almost non-existent. So it's just not something that's going to be a part of my process. There are no wave edges to be played with all the tee times between like 2.5 hours out there. It's really a straightforward week, right? It's a game theory week. There's going to be some chalk out there. And if you look at our past champions, like sure, John Rahm won last year, but it's Hudson Swafford, right? At like 100 and 50 to 1 or something like that. It was Siwoo Kim, and he won it like 60, 70 to 1, right? And that was actually one of your lower numbers in terms of outright winner. Back in 2020, Andrew Landry was like 500 to 1. Back in 2019, Adam Long was like 500 to 1 to win. Back in 2018, John Rahm again, right? So he's kind of like, the trend breaker from that perspective. But it's a week where anyone can win. I mean, look at this leaderboard, right? Bud Colley's up there, right? Dominic Boselli, right? We haven't heard that name in God knows how long. A few guys that make sense, right? Like a Brian Harmon, Adam Hadwin, okay. John Rahm winning makes a lot of sense. But Andrew Landry, Martin Pillar, I don't even know who the hell that is. John Hub, before he really even got on tour. There's just a lot of no names, a lot of older players that show up. So rather than playing a weather edge, which is normally extremely helpful, we're going to be taking more of a game theory approach this week, trying to lean even more into that variance. Because when there's a golf tournament that's won by Adam Long, right, it's won by an Andrew Landry, that sort of thing, the field is wide open. So if you're going to leave salary on the table, I think it's a year that you could go out there and do that sort of thing. But in general, it's much more about getting different on a week like this than it is leaning into one wave versus the other. Let's go ahead, bring up our projections. We'll talk a little bit about DFS and any of your questions down in chat. Let's see what we've got. So David, we'll get to your question. I want to circle back with your Minwoo question. So do I like him at 25 to 1? I think he's a decent play here, right? A little bit popular in terms of DFS. Would I be investing at 25 to 1? I would not be, but I still think he's a decent play, right? Don't want to talk you off of him. Mark says, still getting over last week. You had Ann and Bradley in the playoff. Ooh, that kind of stinks. Yeah, I actually had an Henley at 60 to 1 ticket. Took it after day 2 live. Of course, he was in the lead for a solid amount. He had like 5-6 holes left and then completely went off the rails. I believe he missed 3 of his next 4 fairways, which that's just not something that happens for Russell Henley. And he had that one 3-putt on 16. So it was a kind of tilting from my end. I have to imagine even more tilting for you, Mark, but that's golf Ben, huh? That's the type of situation we see every single week. Nick says, with these late starts, do you build tonight or start in the morning? I'll be building tonight. I wake up too late, Nick. Right? I usually get up at like 9:30, 10 a.m. Now, when we're doing streams this week, right, I'll be getting up a little bit earlier. But for rounds 2 through 4 showdown, I'll be building in the morning for sure. But for main slate, I'll probably do it tonight. Just get it out of the way. The big man lookout, the pride of the University of Pittsburgh. Okay. I don't know if I'd say that much, but yeah, go Pitt, right? Hail to Pitt. Jack Fisher says, could we get up to -30 with the benign weather conditions? Certainly, Jack. The winning score prop right now is at 25. Sorry, it's 27.5 under par, and it's -165 towards the over. So I think it makes sense. FN putting contest, can't play Scheffler. I disagree with the whole putting contest thing. So I did a whole course breakdown this week, especially when you look hole by hole at the stadium course. It's not a putting contest, right? There are plenty of 200+ yard approaches, 4 of which that are into par 3s, and 3 of them that have water on them, right? Then on top of that, your more difficult holes are like 240, 250 in terms of some of your iron shots with water, especially like 18. It's like a 200-yard approach shot with water down the left. Let people think it's a putting contest. I'm definitely playing Scotty this week, that's for sure. Do we run with the recently sober trend in Bet Endicott? I saw a few people doing that, right? Call it the dry January. Out there with guys winning. I don't think he's a bad play, actually. I know I probably wouldn't bet him outright. You've seen crazier things happen at this course, though, so you totally could. I think for DFS, he's intriguing, right? He won out there at Q School. Over on the European Tour, I believe he had another top 10 finish in the fall at one of those Australian events where like all the Australians go, whether you're like PGA Tour or Euro Tour. They all show up to that event. So it was a stacked field top 10, right? Win at Q School, which is extremely impressive with the conditions they had. I think it's just a good play. And if you want to bet him outright because of that narrative, then by all means, go for it, right? You took Montgomery at 50 to 1 and Taylor at 100 to 1. Thanks, Mount Winwoo, of course. I think Montgomery at 50 to 1's okay. Nick Taylor at 100 to 1, though, I'm really liking that. Now, I didn't take any super long shots this week, but Nick Taylor would be my kind of guy, that's for sure. John Rahm said it was a putting contest, then won. Yeah, and then he won without gaining strokes. Right now, they only have shots gain metrics for 2 of the 4 rounds. So, and I can just tell you from the eye test, he gained strokes at La Quinta in Nicklaus. They had him on the coverage that year. They're still going to have Cantlay and Scheffler on all the coverage this week. Saw a few people freaking out about the, sponsored or the featured groups, the marquee group, that sort of thing. They have bonus coverage of the top players for all 3 days. So I can tell you from that year, he definitely gained strokes in the other 2 courses. But for 2 of the 4 rounds, he lost like 2 strokes to the field putting. So, hey, if you can win a putting contest while losing strokes putting half the time, that's pretty crazy, right? And I think you agree with that, Nick, based on what you're saying there. It doesn't seem like a putting contest to me. So in terms of your top end plays, we have the ownership on here as per usual. It's pretty spread out, actually, right? You have everyone up here that's 17% plus in my projections. Your lowest owned is Xander at 17%, which was actually a little bit surprising. I thought he'd be pretty chalky this week, but really isn't, the case there. You have Cantlay at 18.6. You have Sanjay 19.3. Scotty, I do have at 24.2%. And a lot of that's because the public just plays Scotty Scheffler now. I did not expect him to be the number 1 held ticket this week in terms of outright bets, but he's 31% of the hold in terms of books right now. So 31.3% of the money that's put on outright bets has been put on Scotty Scheffler this week, which, again, surprising for me. But compared to these other top-end guys, none of them were in the top 5. I believe the highest of the bunch was Sanjay M over here at, I forget what his odds were. I think they were like 18-1 or something like that. But everyone that's betting, like the casual public out there, are all taking Scotty Scheffler. So I have a hard time believing that he's not going to be the highest owned. He also has a pretty decent track record here with a top 3 finish 4 years ago. And he's your world number 1, right? People, especially if you're not putting in that much research, know who a Scotty Scheffler is at this point. And if they're clicking names up top, right, it's not like they don't know a Xander or a Patrick Cantlay, but they know that Scotty's leaps and bounds better. So he'll be the highest owned. I don't care. I'm still playing him this week. And I'm probably going to, this is something I'm doing here in 2024. I'm playing him every single time he plays. The only time I won't play Scotty Scheffler this year is if he's like egregiously chalky. And the fact that he's 24%, right, compared to like 17, 18% with these other players does not make him egregiously chalky. So I'm playing him, right? That's the role I'm living by here in 2024. I saw a lot of people with their reports from 2023, the thing that Cut Sweats was doing, right? Kind of recapping your year. And it was a whole lot of profit with Scotty Scheffler, at least with some of the sharper DFS players. So I didn't have nearly enough. I was actually one of the players I lost the most money on last year. So we're going to try and change that here for 2024. In terms of our other top end plays, I still love Patrick Cantlay, right? Mentioned that in our 4 plays video too. And makes just a lot of sense from his form, right? If you look at the last 36 rounds, the guy's been a ball striking machine. From tee to green is one of the best players in the world. The putter has surprisingly been a little bit cold, but for whatever reason, you put him out there on the West Coast, right? Close to home, close to where he played out there in college, and he makes everything. So hopefully he can start to do that again, just kind of lean into those vibes. And it seems like every single year we get this version of Cantlay that is in contention every time he plays out West, right? Whether it's even the Shriners, right, over there in the fall. It doesn't really matter what time of the year it is. If it's over there on the West Coast, I mean, Sherwood, right? I think they played the BMW like 4 or 5 years ago there. Cantlay was in contention there. So every time you get him on the West Coast, that POA guy goes out there and snaps off. So still like Cantlay, still like Scotty Scheffler. So you can probably guess what I'm doing with Xander. And it's not because I don't like Xander. It's just because I like Scotty and Cantlay a little bit more. In terms of your 9K range, the ownership drops off quite a bit. So I think it's because of how much ownership is going up here to the 10Ks. We've got significantly lower projections down here in the 9K. You have, 14% ownership on a Tom Kim, 12% on a JT, all very reasonable. So Midwoo, I would say same burns down here at 15%. Are getting a little bit too much steam for my liking, but it's not like you would have to fade both of them right now. I think if you're going to play both of them in your player pool, you might have a little bit of a hard time getting different in the 9K range. But if you're picking one of the two, heck, even if you want to play those two players, just differentiate in the 8K range, right? Go down here, take one of the lower owned players, and you're going to be good to go there. So I'd say this 10K range, get the ownership. I think it makes quite a bit of sense there. This 9K range, especially with players like a Justin Thomas, I mean, I'd even throw like a Jason Day into this conversation. Some leverage to be had. I mean, you can say the same thing about Tony Finau, Ricky Fowler down here at sub 10% ownership numbers. That's going to be extremely useful if you're chalky or up top, right? So let's say you're starting Scotty Scheffler. Let's say in the 8K range, you still want to take an Eric Cole, right, at relatively high ownership. You go down here and you take a JT or, Tony Finau or a Fowler. and you're going to be plenty different to the field. So there's a time and place for getting to some of these outlier plays. There's a reason why Tony Finau and Ricky are being a little bit overlooked. It's all about the form, right? They didn't end 2023, very well, right? They were not playing their best golf. Look at this. In terms of recent form ranking, right, both are outside of the top 100. That is not good, right? Up there for somebody in the 9K range. But we have to remember there's been a break, right? They had like a month and a half off. A lot of these form metrics that we're looking at aren't reflective of how they're playing right now. And Tony, right, Ricky have not played well their first start over there at the Century. But if that's going to keep people completely off of them out here, then I think they're a pretty decent GPP play. So my favorite would be Tony Finau at about 10% ownership. He's played pretty well on this POA overseed in the past. And on top of that, has a really high birdie percentage, right? He's routinely in that top 10 of birdie or better percentage, even without a putter, which is kind of like the Scotty Scheffler syndrome, right? He also has an incredibly high birdie or better percentage. And it's not because he makes a whole lot of putts, right? It's because he hits the ball to 5 feet way more than everyone else is able to. So there are a few ways, I think, to the optimal this week. I don't think you have to be a really good putter. And I've heard people say, oh, it's putting contest, just play all the putters. Let that be the lazy narrative, right? That people lean into. Let that be what steers people away from. I mean, Scotty Scheffler, I still think is going to get some ownership, but let that be why people won't even consider playing a Tony Finau, right? That won't even consider playing a guy like a Wyndham Clark that is broken with his putter right now, as I've heard a few people actually mention this week. It's not the time of year to take that form as seriously, right? We've had one, maybe two events the last month and a half. It means next to nothing. So I shouldn't say it means next to nothing. It matters, right? I mean, obviously ball striking form can be pretty consistent from event to event, but these are elite tier players. They have down weeks. They have down months on the PGA Tour. The reason why they're elite tier players is they aren't held down for very long. So like I mentioned off the bat, right, this isn't a slate where we're going to find much of a weather edge. We're not going to find much of a wave advantage, right, going out there and taking certain golf courses. But what you will find this week is a pretty good game theory edge on these guys that are struggling. So if you can't tell, I like Wyndham Clark this week. In fact, I normally don't play Wyndham Clark when he's up here in the 8-9K range. But now that we're getting him at 9% ownership, like, count me in, right? If everyone wants to give up on the kid that is your US Open returning champion, won the freaking Wells Fargo, then by all means, you don't play him, right? I'm totally fine with the sub 10% Wyndham Clark. Don't get me wrong, that's the perfect time to play him. Eric Cole, excuse me, guys. Let me actually go through some questions here before we go into the 8K range. But yeah, like I was saying with Eric Cole, love him. Still love Eric Cole. No questions? All right, we're good. All right, if you have any questions on specific players, let me know. I was going to stop and go over them, but looks like we're good right now. All right, let's go through this 8K range. So Eric Cole at an 18% ownership, totally fine, right? I mentioned that we knew he was going to be chalk, right? I thought he might even be like 25, maybe 22% owned on a week like this. And he's lower owned than JT Poston, right? Make that make sense. I know they both have decent form coming in, but the results and the consistency for an Eric Cole are leaps and bounds better than JT Poston. And on top of that, JT Poston's more expensive, right? So if you're going to give me a cheaper, lower owned Eric Cole compared to Poston, then I'm going to make that pivot all day. It's not to say that I'm not going to play Poston this week. In fact, just for transparency, I am playing him. It's just that if I was choosing between the two, I don't really understand why Eric Cole's the lower owned of the bunch. So in single entries, in my higher dollar stuff, I'm really leaning into Eric Cole there. But JT Poston, I hate the ownership. I hate the fact that he's a little bit chalky. If you want to fade him just based on that alone, I think it makes plenty of sense, right? Again, play that game theory edge this week. But I'm a sucker for JT. I like the wedges. I love playing him at an event where you have to go low. Won the John Deere Classic, right? And that was like a 25 under par winner. He's got the putter to go out there and fill it up. He's a sucker play for me, right? I'm going to be a sucker and play JT Poston at the higher ownership. But there's a clear case to be made for fading him, right? I mean, Eric Cole should be higher owned. That's just a matter of fact, and he's not, at least per my projections. Tomorrow morning, it would not surprise me if Eric Cole was higher owned than JT Poston. If people were to see these ownership projections, look at the form, right? Just think about the pedigree of player that we have within Eric Cole, and then make that pivot. That would not surprise me in the slightest. In terms of our 8K range, a lot of pivots, right? 6.7% on a Shane Lowry looks pretty juicy. I'm avoiding Daniel Berger and Will Zalatoris like the plague. Daniel Berger especially. He's not played competitive golf for like a year and a half at this point. I love Daniel Berger. He's my spirit animal when it comes to a golfer, just chilling, right, sitting on the boat, drinking a Mai Tai, smoking a cigar, that sort of thing. But he's not played competitive golf in a year and a half. And you saw it with Will Zalatoris. You've seen it with a few guys returning from injury. The short game is not pretty when you first return. And on top of that, your putter's not normally very efficient. So you've seen Zalatoris go through the struggles. I think a lot of people will probably avoid him there. But with Daniel Berger, it's the same thing. I don't think he's worth a shot on the week like this. And yeah, that's my take on it. I think if you're going to play him, you play him in a large field GPP, right? You throw him in the largest of field contests. You just hope that he goes out there and surprises everyone, because the likely outcome is that he misses the cut, right? I know he's going to get 3 whole rounds because of the different format this time, but it's very likely that these two are going to miss round 4. Let's say that much. Adam Hadwin has elite course history. I love that at $8,300. Is getting some ownership. And surprisingly, Siwoo Kim, who also has really good course history, of course, a win around the American Express, and Cam Davis, who's everyone's darling in DFS, are sub 10% owned. So in terms of pivot plays, let's say you want to avoid the chalky Eric Cole, the chalky JT Poston, which I don't think is a bad idea, right? Again, I'm not doing it, but I don't think it's a terrible idea to go out there and fade these two. The Siwoo Kims, the Cameron Davises of the world make a whole lot of sense. I'm playing these two as well, right? I'm getting a lot of exposure down here in the 8K range. And there's a time and place to take both, right? If I need to get a little bit different, because let's say I was chalkier up there in the 9 and 10s, then maybe it's a Siwoo Kim or a Cameron Davis. Let's assume that I took a pivot, right? Maybe I took a Jason Day, or let's say a Tony Finau with one of my more expensive players. Then maybe I can afford to take an Eric Cole. So a lot of my lineup construction is going to dictate how I'm building down here in the 8Ks. And, you know, I know, right, 4.2%, 5.2% of Will Zalatoris looks like some juicy leverage. It's just not the spot, right? There are other guys here you can use for leverage that I think are not only safer plays, but then actually have top 5, top 10 upside. Down here in the 7Ks, ownership's surprisingly spread out. There's not a lot of guys that are mega chalk on a week like this. Steven Yeager, 10% is kind of what I expected. So I'm still going to be getting there for a value play. In terms of the rest of the 7K range, again, not that much crazy chalk, right? Like Davis Thompson, good course history. Pretty decent form heading in, is only 8.7%. Same thing on Eric Van Rooyen, right? Considering his form, that's really not all that crazy. 7% on Pavon, 7.6% on last week's champion. So down here in the 7s, a lot of times we have some egregious chalk. We have guys that are going to be like 15% owned, right? Compared to, 3 to 4% on a lot of the other guys around him. This week, it's not so bad, right? There are a few spots that I would say are getting a little bit high owned. Most notably like these 3 players, right? Even Nick Taylor, Adam Schenk, right, are getting some attention there. As long as you're not only playing guys that are 8 and 7% owned, you're going to be good this week, right? There's not as many landmines down there in the 7K range. If I was going to see anyone over 10% ownership, I would say EVR would be a pretty good candidate for that. Pavon might sniff 10%, right? Maybe 9% on the high end of the spectrum. Grayson Murray, I don't see getting to 10%. So it's especially down to the 6s, it's even more spread out from the ownership. So up top, right, there are a few chalky pieces you're going to have to think about when you're building your lineups. But down here in the 6s and the 7s, right, outside of a few isolated examples, you're not going to have that much issue with differentiation. So if you're starting with, let's say, JT as your first man in, right? Let's say that you're avoiding this 10K range. You go down here, you throw in like a Tony Finau, you're going to have the world's most different lineup, right? If you're starting that different up top, this 6, 7K range is going to give you a bunch of guys that are sub 5%. You're kind of overdoing it, right? That's why I don't think you have to avoid some of the chalk up here, like a Scotty Scheffler, 25%, right? That's pretty steep ownership. These other guys up here, like nearly 20% themselves. Even if you started with one of these 4 and took one of these nearly 20% owned players with like a Poston, Eric Cole, this kind of range, you can get away with it, right? You've got 4 other spots where you're going to have a lot of choices that are sub 5%, that you can make those lineups work. You'll be different enough. You're not going to duplicate yourself, and you're going to have that leverage of those other 4 positions. So it's not a week where you have those ownership landmines, which I think makes your life a little bit more simple. Let's see where we left off in terms of a player pool and whether any questions came up. Would I rather play Sanjay or Tom Kim? So personally, I'd say Tom Kim because of the lower ownership. I think they're very similar plays. So yeah, Tom Kim for me, but that's close. Good question. Play a UCLA golfer like Jake Knapp. Yeah, I like Cantlay this week, right? He's a UCLA guy. Jake Knapp is one of your poppers from the Corn Ferry Tour. Wasn't as consistent as maybe some of the other guys on the Corn Ferry, but would routinely go out there, be first round leader, would go out there, just explode over the weekend, go from like middle of the pack to maybe even winning on the Corn Ferry Tour. I really like him for Showdown. So Jennifer, I think you're thinking the right way. These California guys, they kind of know that power grass, but yeah, Jake Knapp, he's a popper. I like it. Sub $7,000 guys. We'll talk about him in a few minutes. I got you. What do I think about Alex Smalley and Ryan Moore? I think Smalley's getting some attention, but it's not too bad that you have to avoid him. The form with Smalley is kind of what people like, right? Especially the approach play with Smalley. So what's his price tag? He's 7,300. Scroll down and find him. So Alex Smalley is always going to be a flusher, right? When we check these stats, you're almost always going to see 0.6, 0.7 shots gained on approach. And that's why a lot of people get him towards the top of their model, right? A lot of players in this range aren't going to hit the ball as well on approach. The issue is going to be the putter, which I think for a lot of people would rule out a player, right? They'd be like, oh, he can't putt, so we're not going to play him at a putting contest. You know, maybe that's why he's not crazy ownership, right? We got him at 5.8%. Normally, somebody with that kind of approach record, decent recent form as well, would be like 8-9%, like we have with an Eric Van Rooyen, right? Nick Taylor up there at 8.8%. So I like it, right? Especially because it's leaning into that ball striking narrative that I think a lot of people are dismissing this week. And you said Ryan Moore. So Ryan Moore is surprisingly a really good course fit. So let me find him down here. I believe he's a little bit cheaper at $6,900. So he's number 13 for recent form rank, but he's also a top 20 just total model ranking, which of course, guys, is blacked out on here. If you want access to all my modeling and projections, check out the Patreon page down below. But I can tell you that my total model, which not only uses recent form, but also looks at long-term form and course fit at the AMEX, really likes Ryan Moore. He's a decent putter, right? If we look at the last 36 rounds, get an idea for how he's been playing. Let's see. Neutral with the putter, but gaining 0.6 strokes on approach. He's a little bit streaky with the putter, so hopefully you can catch him on a hot week. But once again, you're not going to get any complaints from me on somebody that gains with the approach play. I mean, look at this in comparison, right? 0.6 strokes compared to what? 0.3 with Goddard. I love Goddard this week. Worth mentioning. We're going to talk about some of these sub 7K guys here in a minute. But yeah, like a Doug Gim. No surprise. I'm playing him this week. I mean, look at these ball striking stats. I think that people get too enamored with the putting and forget that ball striking's the other half of the equation, right? Let's see. All right, let's talk about some 7K guys. In 1 second, actually. Hadwin and one and done. I'm all for it, Matthew. Actually, I'm not playing one and done this year, so I can't give you like my exposure. But if I played one and done this week, it would be Adam Hadwin. It 100% would. You're going to likely get a top 20 from Hadwin. Anytime he plays in the desert, the guy's an absolute boss. I don't know what it is. He puts his lights out on these overseeded greens, kind of like we have at the Waste Management, what we're going to have on a week like this. Yes, I love that. In fact, I wish I was in a one and done because that's like I love that play. Gonna start Minwoo, Clark, and Cole. Is that crazy in a single entry? No, right? So you've got two guys that have some ownership there, right? One pivot. I think that's a perfect kind of start, right? Now, with your other three guys, right, make sure that 1-2 of them are a little bit different, right? Sub 5% owned. If you're going to take one more value play that's like 8-9%, that's fine too, David. Large field GPP, that would work. Single entry, you're more than fine with that kind of lineup. So yeah, in single entries, I'd say, David, you don't have to be as different as what you're going to have in like GPPs, that sort of thing. And starting with those three players is a pretty good start in single entry. I don't think it's crazy at all. In terms of some of our sub 7K players, Bjork stands out. So I love Toasty, right? You know that I like him as a Corn Ferry Tour guy. Absolute flusher, another just top tier ball striker. But I like some of the putters in this range too. So and Alexander Bjork completely screwed me last week. I had like 20% too. I went well overboard out there on my boy, but I'm not going to give up on him that easily, right? It's one event on the European Tour. He gained strokes to the field in over 80% of rounds. So hopefully he can lean back into that. So I kind of like him more for a week-long contest as opposed to like should say showdown contest, or even just anything for single day, because he's not really a popper. If you take a look at his shots gained profile from the DP World Tour, he's a guy that would just consistently grind away at you, right? Gain 2.5, 3 strokes per round to the field. Not so much to go out there and shoot like a 62, a 63. So if you're going to get exposure to a Bjork, you get through Ryo Hisasune, is I think how you say his name. He's actually kind of popular at 4.4% and $7,500. He's also an extremely consistent player, right? Isn't somebody that pops as often as some of his peers, but what he does do is go out there and grind out cuts. So if you're going to try and find somebody this week, as more of a consistent cash play, I don't play cash, but those two are like the nuts plays, especially with the form with Ryo. I think that, the ownership's not too out of hand either. I think he's a pretty decent play for GPPs, but for cash contests, he's probably my favorite option of the new guys. A few other names I'll point out for you. So we already talked about Toasty. He's the main one down here. We'll talk about my favorite. And there's probably people on my Patreon. I haven't even mentioned this name yet to anyone this week. It's the first time here. He's marked as a yes on my Patreon. And I'm sure a few people that are subscribed there may have seen that earlier and went, who the fuck is Raul Pareda? Get used to the name, all right? This is somebody who's going to be a legit name. He has a full-time status on tour this year, and he was one of your top 5 from Q School. A few other times we saw him was at the Mexico Open. He was in contention at Vedanta Vallarta over that Q School against an extremely strong field, finished in the top 5. This is the kind of player that I think has a much higher pedigree than people give him credit for, and is one day, he's really young. I think he's still like 19 years old or something like that. Might grow into like an everyday type of player. So I think he's a popper. If you take a look at his shots gained profile, he's a really good putter. At Q School, they didn't have shot link, but he was number 2 in the field in putts per green in regulation. And then at Vedanta Vallarta, he gained a bunch of strokes on approach and a bunch with his putter. So, he looks like a good fit for this course, right? He's one of those young, take aim at every single pin sort of guy. Now, I'm playing like 3% this week, right? So let's not go crazy about it. But there are a lot of guys down here like a Pareda that I think are excellent plays. So $6,100. Call me crazy, but I'm playing Raul Pareda. He's we'll see. I've heard good things about the kid too. And anytime we've seen him on tour, it's like 2-3 times at this point, he's played well. He seems like the kind of guy I want to get to, right? And let's look at the shots gained metrics just for shits and gigs, right? What has he looked like when we've seen him on tour? Gaining 1 stroke off the tee, 0.6 strokes with the putter. Again, the stuff at Q School is not going to show up in terms of shots gained. Not great around the green, but this is a birdie fest, right? We're talking about the American Express, right? Going out there, trying to shoot something like 25 to 30 under par. I don't know. These are the kind of guys I want to get to this week, that's for sure. And if you take Raul Pareda, you can take a Scotty and a Cantlay together, right? That's the other end of that. It's like, obviously, he's limited with upside because he's $6,100, but it's what it buys you on the other end, right? Let's talk about a few others. We're not going to be as detailed with these others. Pearson Cootie is an absolute madman, won on the Korn Ferry Tour multiple times. He should not be $6,200. I'm playing him this week. Chandler Phillips, worth a few looks. Another winner on the Korn Ferry Tour that is a really good putter and wedge player. Another way you can get to the optimal this week. Norman Zhang, a lot of people are going to play him. Obviously, you guys saw last week why I was so excited about his future. Nick Dunlap is a sponsor exemption into this field, another player with a really high pedigree. So there are just guys down here you can take, right? A more common name would be like a Callum Turan, right? I think he's a really good play at about $6,500. Main reason for that is he's a ball striker, right? You're getting a top tier ball striker down here at $6,500. So always going to be on my list. Got Joel Damon. You have guys like Lanto Griffin, who also has a pretty good track record around here that I think are worth playing. There are so many 6K players you can get. Adrian DeMonte just start. There are just so many guys. Harry Hall, Chris Goddard. I've named like 10 guys down here I'd play. I'm playing like 20 of them. I'm literally just taking a shit ton of guys down here in the 6K range, which is really going to save me some salary. So I'm not going to go crazy on any one of those guys. They're all going to be like 3 to 5%ers for me. And that's the strategy that I take, right? Because I know some people will say like, oh, 3%, that's only like 5 or 6 lineups that you have to work with. You don't need a ton of lineups to work with when you get one of those players to pop and finish top 5. Right? No one's going to have them. They're going to be sub 0.5% owned type of plays. And you don't need 20 lineups with that player to get there, right? You don't have to be perfect with your other 5 spots to win a GPP when you have, let's assume Pareto goes off. If you have somebody at like 0.2% ownership, that is the absolute nuts at that kind of price. So that's my, I call it a scatter shot kind of approach down there towards the bottom. Not everyone's favorite strategy for DFS, but it's what I go with. That's for sure. Let's see, appreciate it, of course. You're between Hadwin and Montgomery and one and done, likely going to go Hadwin. I like Hadwin, man. It's call it a gut feeling, Matthew, but it's a big gut feeling, that's for sure. What's Bo Hostler's ownership? Let me tell you right now. Let's scroll down to it, shall we? So he's up here at the top end of the 7s. I've got him at 8.3%. So not non-existent, right? But not low owned as well. So he's just kind of in the middle there at 8.3%. All right, let's talk a little bit about lineup construction, and then we'll talk props for anyone that's here on that end. I did put out a video for props this week, which are going to have my full thoughts on that end, but we'll talk a little bit here before we hop on out. So in terms of our lineup construction piece, like I said, this top end has some chalk, but because of all the different options down in the 7K range to get different, it's not as complicated a slate. Honestly, you just kind of take your guys. So up top, let's go ahead and throw Scotty into a lineup. Let's go ahead and take Xander. Well, we're going to throw Cantlay in here, but you could take a Xander if you wanted to as well. Or you could take both expensive players on the board and show you how you can make this kind of lineup work. Just for the sake of this, all right, a lineup that I'd actually build. Let's go ahead and throw Cantlay in there and go down to the 6K range and throw one of our favorite little misfits right down here in the 6s. We're not going to take $6,100 Pareto, right? He was just one I wanted to point out because honestly, I think he's got a bright future, but he's also $6,100. It saves you an absolute fuck ton of salary. But let's just throw in Callum Turan, right? We start with those 2 super expensive players. We're down to $7,100. Maybe we take one more pivot down here, right, towards the top of the 6s. Toasty, right, one of my top plays of the week. Throw him in there at $6,800. And now you've got 72.5 remaining, right? And it's not ideal, right? We're skipping that 8-9K range, but I have a top 5 bet on Scotty this week. I have a top 10 bet on Patrick Cantlay. I really like the chances to both be live. And a lot of times people say, like, don't bet 2 elites out there for top 5, top 10 markets. It's just how I see it playing out this week. So I definitely played it that way. So if you're going to start with that kind of lineup, you can make it work, right? Go down here, take, let's say, a Ryan Moore, right? I know somebody mentioned him before as one of your guys. Then you're there at $7,600. So one of these 6K guys can really buy you a lot of upside up top. And if you want to go to the full extreme, let's go ahead and just show you what Pareto would do, right? You get even more salary flexibility. So throw him in there at $6,100. You take one more pivot here, like, maybe Lanto Griffin at $6,600. And now you're back to $7,500, right? You can take an 8K guy in this kind of lineup and still have the salary to make it work. So let's say you really like Montgomery this week, right? Throw him in there. You still have $7,000 left for your last man in. So it's not really that I think that a Pareto is going to go off, right? Win this golf tournament or even finish in the top 20 for that matter. It's what it buys you up top. And on a week where it's all about birdie or better upside, there are a lot of birdie guys down there, right? A lot of these Corn Ferry Tour poppers that you can get to. So Jake Knapp, I know somebody mentioned him before. He's up here at $6,800. He's another prime name to consider for that as a piece of salary savings, right? If you want to spend up for a double spend up, but also still give you that birdie or better upside. In terms of cash, I want to go over some of my top cash plays. So first off, Scotty's a must play in cash. If you're playing cash and you're not playing Scotty Scheffler, send me a head-to-head invite. I would love to play you for money. Jokes aside, though, I'm not actually, it's not really a joke. I will play you head-to-head if you guarantee you're not going to play Scotty Scheffler. But Royo Hisatuni, right, mentioned he has an extremely high floor. You could say the same thing about Bjork. Now, Bjork may be a little bit more risky because he didn't play well so last time around. But still, the types of guys you want to take in a cash contest. So just in case we have somebody that wants to take my action on fading Scotty, I'll leave you with just those 3 out there for cash because I got to make sure I can beat the guy I'm playing, right? If somebody takes me up on that. All right, let's talk about some props now. So in terms of props, the Prize Picks board is not the best pricing. I actually really agree with where Prize Picks has the board priced. But on Underdog, there's still some hanging value available. And just to give you an idea of why I like some of these plays, let me go ahead and first off, see if we have pin locations. I was kind of hoping the PGA Tour would post them. It doesn't look like they have. But let me bring up Fanduel, which if you guys have seen the prop video, a lot of what we go over here is just going to be me, repeating what I said in that video. But if you haven't, stay tuned and we'll go through the board because especially in Underdog, there's a lot of value right now and a lot of value that I've fired on. So let's bring up Fanduel Sportsbook here and show you guys what we're talking about. So first off, they have Cantlay up here at 6.5 birdies. They have Scotty Scheffler up here at 6.5. Same thing with Xander, some of these other players. You have guys like Tony Finau at 5.5. Same thing with Jason Day, Tom Kim, all these sort of players. You can see here with Tom Kim, right? He's juiced well over 5.5, right? I think that's rather interesting. And then somebody like a Sungjae Im down here is minus 175 towards the over. Over here on Prize Picks, right, they've adjusted for a lot of that. I think having guys like Xander, Cantlay at 6 makes a lot of sense. 6.5 for Scotty is probably the efficient number there as well. But over here in Underdog, right, everyone's like 0.5 lower. So, for example, right, Tony Finau was at 5.5 birdies. Get him at 5 over here on Underdog. You can get Justin Thomas at 5, right? Another guy I'd probably project for 5, maybe even, 5.5, maybe even 6 birdies. You had Sungjae Im, right? He was like minus 165 for his over, right? You could take him at 5.5. You go down here and take, let's find a few others. A lot of them have bumped, by the way, but there's still a few available. So you got like Tom Kim there at 5.5. Wyndham Clark, you could take out there at 5 birdies. All of these are values, right? And now it's not just the line discrepancy compared to Prize Picks, Fanduel, like we were mentioning. It's also the weather, which is absolutely perfect out there for Thursday. You're talking about sub 5-mile-an-hour winds, perfect weather conditions from the temperature perspective. It's going to be a day to go low, right? And just to give you some, I'd say a comparison, a little bit of perspective with what to expect, right? Back in 2020, it played minus 2.8 as an average. There were days back there in 2020, right, where it played 3.29 under par, right? That's probably what we're going to see for round 1 at La Quinta. Over here in 2022, right, it played 2 under par, right? Now, it played 2.86 under par day 1. Maybe it got a little bit windier, right, for rounds 2 and 3. But we're going to see at least, right, that 2.8 under par average. And then last year, right, it played 2.4 under par at La Quinta, right? I mean, I think we're going to see well better than that kind of average. So, these birdie props are absolute money. The birdie rate at a lot of the golf courses were between 4.5 and 5 birdies. At La Quinta, it was closer to 4.8. At the Nicklaus tournament course, it was actually 5 birdies per round, so a little bit more than what you had at La Quinta. And then the stadium course, I believe, was in that same range. It was like 4.5 to 5, depending on the round. So no matter which course these guys are playing, I think there's a lot of value to be had, but especially on the La Quinta and Nicklaus tournament course guys. Those courses, I say especially for like an elite tier bomber, are set up for birdies. You have 4 extremely reachable par 5s. All of them are sub 550 yards on both courses. You also have a bunch of potentially drivable par 4s too. They're like 370, 380 on the scorecard, but you have to remember we're in Palm Springs, light air, also a little bit of elevation that these players are playing at. And they're going to be able to hit the ball a lot further than they typically would. Also firm fairways because it's pretty dry out there in the desert. So you're going to see these guys tear it up. Last year, I believe Rick Run Good was the one with this data, so go ahead, credit him for it. Anyone that was in the 9K plus range at this event has gained on average per round like 2.3 strokes per round. And that's well above the average, right? Normally your elite tier players gain like a stroke and a half to the field. They gain even more strokes to the field out here at the American Express. So these birdie props, like they're severely mispriced, right? They're slightly above the tour averages where they should be maybe even an entire birdie and a half higher than your tour average. So love these, even the strokes props. So the reason I was mentioning how many shots gained they were having, to go out here and shoot a 67, they're likely going to have to gain 2 strokes to the field. If the average for a lot of these elite tier players was 2.3 shots gained to the field, right? That's getting you to that 67. So I didn't take a bunch of unders on strokes, but I'm not against the idea, right? Obviously, we can't play all these birdie props together. So that's the other part of the video that I had to go through is you have to mix these with other sports. But if you had to mix in some stuff on strokes, I disagree with FanDuel's pricing. Right? Like I said, if all these guys are going to go out there and gain on average like 2 strokes to the field, it's doable for some of these elite tier guys to shoot a 67. So you can see they have Minwoo at like, pretty much even money odds out there at 67.5. I would project him for slightly closer to like minus 150 under. Right? If I was the one setting the numbers out there for FanDuel, I would be a little bit more bullish on their stats. But if you just want to stick to the ones that are like no doubt going to be good plays, it's the birdie props. So the way that I handled it, I'll go ahead and show you guys if you didn't see the video, is I just entered a bunch of just plus EV pairings that I got from the DGF optimizer, and they like all hit, right? It was the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then one ended up missing, which was unfortunately with Scotty Scheffler at 5.5. So it was one of my favorite props. It was an entire birdie discrepancy compared to what we had over there on Prize Picks. But yeah, Tobias Harris had 0 at halftime for 3-pointers and then made 2 in the third. So not going to hit all your props, right? You're going to do pretty decent out there, but we'll take it. Not the end of the world by any means. That's all I've got for the live stream, though, guys. If you have any last-second questions, I'll go over them. If not, I'm going to go ahead and just show you guys my betting card, and we'll get out of here. So let me go ahead, bring up Hard Rock Bet. Actually, we'll just bring up my Twitter. I posted it on Twitter. It's probably easier that way, and we'll go through it. So one moment. Here we go. All right. So first off, if you're not following me on Twitter, do so. Link is in the description of the video. But here's my betting card for this week. Got a Scotty top 5 at plus 140. Mentioned the Cantlay top 10. Also bet Justin Thomas for top 10. Now that was like a half unit bet. Put $100 on that one and 200 on these top 2. Eric Cole top 20. I put whole 200 on that. I feel pretty good about him finishing top 20. Jaeger Bombs, put a little 100 sack on him for a top 20. And then Ryder and Toasty also took a little just $100 shot on them. So obviously, guys that I talked about in my video this week, love all these plays at this golf course and wanted to find a way to get some exposure. And unfortunately, over there in Hard Rock Bet, the odds are terrible. And I'll bring up Hard Rock Bet just to show you guys, kind of complain a little bit. But the odds they're offering in terms of outright odds are despicable. I mean, just borderline scam behavior. Let's see. No, I got to type in a security code before I share my screen for you guys. All right, there we go. All right. In terms of the outright odds, or actually, I didn't even have to sign in, did I? Oh, now I feel like a little bit of a dope. Let's bring up the outright market. I just want to show you guys the odds they're offering. They're not pretty. Let's put it that way. Look at this. So they've got Scotty at plus 475. He's like plus 550 on every other book. Patrick Cantlay at 8-1. He's like 10-1 on every other book. Xander Schauffele at 10-1. He's like 12-1 on every other book. And then like Tom Kim down here at plus 1400. He's like 25-1 on books. So like, if you want to bet outrights, and it's not just the top end of the board, like even guys like a Hostler, you're not getting very good odds on. Really just anyone on the board, you're not going to get solid value. That's why I bet all top 5s, top 10s, and top 20s. Their markets were a lot more competitive with what you had on the other websites. And I don't know whether it's because they lost a lot of money on outrights the last few weeks. I know they had a couple like $30,000, $40,000 tickets on some of those like long shots the last 2 weeks. Maybe that's why they're going out here and pricing the board like this. But if they're going to do that, and this is the only operator that's legal down here in Florida, then I'm just not going to partake. So just to show you guys the slips, let you know I'm not bullshitting you. And the reason why I show you guys my slips and the money I put behind it is, and I'm just going to call out people right now, 90% of the people you see on Twitter betting don't actually bet their picks. There's a reason why they'll never show you any sort of betting slip. They, will talk in units, which is really just a made up term. You're never going to get that from me, right? When I bet things, I show my bet slips to let you guys know that I'm actually playing it myself and how much I like everything, right? So actually, I thought it was $100 on these. It was actually just $50 on Ryder and Toasty. So I was capping before, apparently. I just forgot about that. Steven Yeager read a $100 bet, right? $200 over there on Eric Cole. Only put 100 on JT. I don't know. I don't like the number very much. So that's why I only put 100 there. And then, my big bets are Cantlay and Scotty Scheffler, right? They're my 2 main stands of this week. These betting numbers were very competitive with the rest of the industry. I think the best number in Scotty was like plus 150, maybe even just plus 145. So I didn't mind laying that plus 140. And then with Patrick Cantlay, it was plus 120. So once again, it was like 5 100s right off. And I'll eat that, right? That's not that terrible. So that's the betting card this week. Best of luck out there, whether you guys are playing DFS, outrights, props, you guys name it. Let's have ourselves a weekend. Stream for rounds 2 through 4 will be in the morning. So lock is around 11:30 every day. So we're probably going to go live at 9, right? Give people 2.5 hours before lock. So if they can't show up live, right, they can watch that replay. I'm going to get ready for that action there. So Follow the Twitter if you haven't already so you can get all of those starting times. But that's all I've got for you guys. Best of luck out there, and I got to build some lineups now.